And again, it's good to be here. Good to see each one here this evening. If you will, open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 20.
Abran sus Biblias en el capítulo 20, chapter 20.
Yes, sir. Genesis chapter 20. Genesis 20.
Capítulo 20.
In Genesis 20, in verse 1, we read, And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country, and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned in Gerar.
En Génesis capítulo 20, versículo 1 dice, de ahí partió Abraham a la tierra del Negev y acampó entre Cades y Shur y habitó como forastero en Gerar.
Abraham travels south. For your own benefit, I would encourage you to study a Bible map and see where these areas are.
Abraham viaja hacia el sur para su propio beneficio. Le animo a que estudie un buen mapa bíblico y vea dónde están estas áreas.
I didn't put this on here, but mostly, I think most of us, like Steve there, have maps in the backs of our Bibles.
Steve tiene un mapa en su Biblia.
In Genesis chapter 20 and verse 2, we read, And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah.
En Génesis capítulo 20, versículo 2 leemos, y dijo Abraham de Sara su mujer, es mi hermana, y Abimelech, rey de Gerar, envió y tomó a Sara.
Here Abraham is doing the same thing that he did before in Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 and following.
Aquí Abraham está haciendo lo mismo que hizo antes, en Génesis capítulo 12, versículo 10 en adelante.
And I would encourage you to turn there, Genesis chapter 12. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 11 through 13, here we read, And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarah Sarai, his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass that the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is my wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee.
Génesis capítulo 12, versículo 11 al 13, leemos, y aconteció que cuando estaba para entrar en Egipto, dijo a Sarai su mujer, he aquí ahora conozco que eres mujer de hermoso aspecto, y cuando te vean los egipcios dirán su mujer es, y me matarán a mí y a ti te reservarán la vida. Ahora pues di que eres mi hermana para que me vaya bien por causa tuya y viva mi alma por causa de ti.
In verses 18 and 19, here in the same chapter, Genesis chapter 12, verses 18 and 19. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that it was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her, and go thy way.
En Génesis capítulo 12, versículos 18 y 19. Entonces Faraón llamó a Abraham y le dijo, ¿qué es esto que has hecho conmigo? ¿Por qué no me declaraste que era tu mujer? ¿Por qué dijiste es mi hermana, poniéndome en ocasión de tomarla para mí por mujer? Ahora pues, he aquí tu mujer, tómala y vete.
As we studied before, Abraham is not fully trusting God. God has repeatedly promised Abraham certain things. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and 3, and so forth.
Como estudiamos antes, Abraham no confía plenamente en Dios. Dios le ha prometido repetidamente a Abraham ciertas cosas. Génesis capítulo 12, verso 1 al 3.
Notice here in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3, now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, into a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed.
12, 1 to 3.
Mm-hmm.
Capítulo 12, versículo 1 al 3. Pero Jehová había dicho a Abraham, vete de tu tierra y de tu parentela y de la casa de tu padre a la tierra que te mostraré. Y haré de ti una nación grande y te bendeciré y engrandeceré tu nombre y serás bendición. Bendeciré a los que te bendijeren y a los que te maldijeren maldeciré y serán benditas en ti todas las familias de la tierra.
Shouldn't he have trusted in God? God is fully able to do what he promises.
No debería haber confiado en Dios. Dios es plenamente capaz de hacer lo que promete.
Are we any better?
¿Somos mejores?
Do we fully trust God?
¿Confiamos plenamente en Dios?
Our actions will answer that question.
Nuestras acciones responderán a esa pregunta.
In Genesis chapter 20, verses 3 through 7,
En Génesis capítulo 20, versículo 3 al 7.
here we read, But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, thou art but a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, She is my sister? And even she herself said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine.
Génesis capítulo 20, versículo 3 al 7, leemos. Pero Dios vino a Abimelech en sueño de noche y le dijo, he aquí muerto eres a causa de la mujer que has tomado, la cual es casada con marido. Mas Abimelech no se había llegado a ella y dijo, Señor, ¿matarás también al inocente? ¿No me dijo él, mi hermana es, y ella también dijo, es mi hermano? Con sencillez de mi corazón y con limpieza de mis manos he hecho esto. Y le dijo Dios en sueños, yo también sé que con integridad de tu corazón has hecho esto, y yo también te detuve de pecar contra mí, y así no te permití que la tocases. Ahora pues devuelve la mujer a su marido, porque es profeta y orará por ti, y vivirás. Y si no la devolvieres, sabe que de cierto morirás tú y todos los tuyos.
God comes to Abimelech in a dream and warns him.
Dios viene a Abimelech en sueños y le advierte.
Let's take a moment and look a little bit at Abimelech.
Tomemos un momento y miremos un poco a Abimelech.
First, this may be a title rather than his actual name.
Primero, esto puede ser un título en lugar de su nombre real.
This Abimelech and later his son, in relation to Isaac, are kings of Philistia.
Este Abimelech y más tarde su hijo en relación con Isaac son reyes de Filistea.
Psalm 34 is addressed or speaks of Abimelech another king, possibly Achish, king of Gath. Note the title in Psalm 34.
En Salmos 34 se dirige o habla de Ahimelech, otro rey, posiblemente Aquis, rey de Gad. Tenga en cuenta el título del Salmo 34.
And the title is not inspired, we know that. But it says it's addressed to Abimelech. Abimelech identifies himself as a righteous man. He did not know that Sarah was married to Abraham.
Abimelech se identifica a sí mismo como un hombre justo. No sabía que Sara estaba casada con Abraham.
Note what God says to him in verse 6.
Note lo que Dios le dice en el versículo 6.
And God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her.
Y le dijo Dios en sueños, yo también sé que con integridad de tu corazón has hecho esto, y yo también te detuve de pecar contra mí, y así no te permití que la tocases.
God had held him back from sinning because he had not known the truth.
Dios le había impedido pecar porque no había conocido la verdad.
In Genesis chapter 20 and verses 8 through 13,
En Génesis capítulo 20, versículo 8 al 13,
we read, Therefore Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and said, and told all these things in their ears, and the men were sore afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, What hast thou done unto us? And what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not to be done. Verse 10. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? And Abraham said, Because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. And yet, indeed, she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, This is thy kindness which thou shalt show unto me at every place whither we shall come. Say of me, He is my brother.
en Génesis capítulo 20, versículo 8 al 13 leemos. Entonces Abimelech se levantó de mañana y llamó a todos sus siervos y dijo todas estas palabras en los oídos de ellos, y temieron los hombres en gran manera. Después llamó a Abimelech a Abraham y le dijo, ¿qué nos has hecho? ¿En qué pequeño contra ti que has atraído sobre mí y sobre mi reino tan grande pecado? Lo que no debiste hacer has hecho conmigo. Dijo también Abimelech a Abraham, ¿qué pensabas para que hicieses esto? Y Abraham respondió, porque dije para mí, ciertamente no hay temor de Dios en este lugar, y me matarán por causa de mi mujer. Y a la verdad también es mi hermana, hija de mi padre, mas no hija de mi madre, y la tomé por mujer. Y cuando Dios me hizo salir errante de la casa de mi padre, yo le dije, esta es la merced que tú harás conmigo, que en todos los lugares a donde lleguemos digas de mí, mi hermano es.
Abimelech rises early and tells all of this to his servants, who are rightly afraid.
Ahimelech se levanta temprano y cuenta todo esto a sus sirvientes, quienes con razón tienen miedo.
He then reproves or corrects Abraham for his actions.
Luego reprende o corrige a Abraham por sus acciones.
Can we learn a lesson from this?
¿Podemos aprender una lección de esto?
Is there a point where those around us in the world have to correct us for our behavior?
Llega un punto el que quienes nos rodean en el mundo tienen que corregirnos por nuestro comportamiento.
Do some in the world act more righteously than we do?
Hay algunas personas en el mundo que actúan con más rectitud que nosotros.
After correcting Abraham, he gives him a great deal of riches.
Después de corregir a Abraham, le da muchas riquezas.
God is still watching over Abraham.
Dios todavía está velando por Abraham.
Do we see God's mercy and grace here?
Vemos aquí la misericordia y la gracia de Dios.
Abimelech gives Abraham sheep, oxen, and servants. Verse 14.
Abimelech le da a Abraham ovejas, bueyes y sirvientes. Versículo 14.
And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants and gave them unto Abraham and restored him Sarah his wife.
2014.
14.
Capítulo 20, versículo 14. Entonces Abimelech tomó ovejas y vacas y siervos y siervas y se los dio a Abraham y le devolvió a Sara su mujer.
In verse 15, he gives him free use of the land.
En el verso 15 le da libre uso del terreno.
And Abimelech said, Behold, my land is before thee, dwell where it pleaseth thee.
Y dijo Abimelech, he aquí, mi tierra está delante de ti, habita donde bien te parezca.
He gives him 1,000 pieces of silver, verse 16.
1000 piezas de plata, versículo 16.
And unto Sarah he said, Behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eyes unto all that are with thee, and with all other. Thus she was reproved.
Y a Sara dijo, he aquí, he dado 1000 monedas de plata a tu hermano, mira que él te es como un velo para los ojos de todos los que están contigo y para con todos, así fue vindicada.
Then Abraham prays for Abimelech, and God heals him and his people.
Entonces Abraham ora por Abimelech y Dios lo sana a él y a su pueblo.
Verse 17. So Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. For, verse 18, the Lord had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife.
Versículos 17 y 18. Entonces Abraham oró a Dios y Dios sanó a Abimelech y a su mujer y a sus siervas y tuvieron hijos, porque Jehová había cerrado completamente toda matriz de la casa de Abimelech a causa de Sara, mujer de Abraham.
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
¿Alguno tiene una pregunta o comentario?
Well, I don't know which one got their hands up first, but
I have a question on verse 16.
verse 16, versículo 16.
Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eye. I don't understand. What does that mean? And thus she was reproved. It sounded like she was corrected for what happened.
Well, he's already corrected Abraham earlier. He corrects him. What verse were we?
You're talking about God or
No,
Abimelech?
Abimelech does, and I think in this text in verse 17, I think it's Abimelech that is reproving
Her.
Sarah, not God. God isn't in this case reproving her. I think it's Abimelech. And the eyes to the covering, I didn't really do a lot of studying on that. So I'm not sure I can give you a very good answer, but I think he's just getting at that, hey, I paid him this money, and he's your husband, he's her brother, half brother, but he's your husband, and kind of a covering for her, and that everybody now knows she's his wife. Jim, did you have a comment to answer?
Well, Job 31:1 kind of bears on that a little bit. I get the idea that the marriage covenant, in it, we promise to keep our eyes to one person. And this is kind of the connection that I see here.
You guys follow Jim with the verse, Job 31:31?
Proverbs 31:1, I looked over there. Made a covenant with my eye. By then I should, I think, want to make.
And what was that?
I will not look on another one. Would that be the covenant?
Yeah.
Well, that would be what Jim is
Yeah.
getting at. Here
Be
he's
covered to your eyes. In other words, her husband, for this, she shouldn't be looking at another man.
Did you say Proverbs 31:1?
31:1, yeah.
Proverbios 31 y versículo 1. Steve was mentioning. I don't know that I did much of an answer for you, Steve.
That's fine.
But something to look at. That is one of those things that is kind of the way it's worded, kind of.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily talk like that today, but something to consider. John, you had.
Only have eyes for you. Was that it?
I haven't. Well, I understand God's grace and forgiveness, but Abraham did this twice, and it seems like God rewarded him for him being that way. I understand Abimelech saying, "Well, I'm restoring you," but he let him do this and almost caused the man to sin, but yet he gets rich off the deal.
Well, now he's already very wealthy. Abraham is not a poor man at this point, so it's not that that Abimelech gives him all this money and he had nothing to do that. We have to also remember that God sometimes would, as what is it, Acts 17:30, I think, God winked at some of their behavior. Now that was specifically, I believe, under the Mosaical system, which this is before that, but God was merciful. He or is, and He's gracious. He's I think, and the Bible doesn't explain this fully. I don't read anywhere where God says I'm doing this or that, but I would say that this is one of those cases where he's not pleased necessarily with Abraham doing this, with Abraham lying. God is not approving of lying. He certainly doesn't condone such. He corrects the idea of that, but it seems to be that he's kind of, yes, winking, as it says there in Acts, I think 17:30, that he's winking at this, kind of overlooking it, because hey, I'm bringing him along, I'm bringing them along, and Abraham, in many ways, was very righteous. In fact, God later, of course, points all this out. Steve,
Like you pointed that out earlier, whether it was when he went to Egypt, maybe not leaving when he was supposed to, but God has testing him, and then finally his offering of Isaac. Now I know.
and
So you pointed that out.
yeah, and I think now I'm not going to say I'm absolutely right on that, but I do think that there is a point where God says, and we're told He uses that exact wording. Now I know, and so to me that just seems to be kind of in comparison to what we're seeing all this. It's like the Israelites later on. Look at all I've done for you, and you keep not listening. You keep not doing what you're supposed to do.
How long do you think he was there,
Who?
Abraham,
Where?
with Abimelech?
I haven't gone through and really studied it. I don't know about your Bible, but mine has some dates in it, so you can kind of play around with.
But,
Now they're not inspired; these are estimates. But
it says at the end of the chapter that God undid their wombs so they could have kids because
Mhm.
Eris or Sarai's sake. But I mean, is it just during that time period they didn't have any kids, or is it because before he knew he was going to do this?
that is the one thing that always has puzzled me in looking at that particular thought, John. Um, it would seem that time has to be passing. That this isn't like uh, he takes Sarah, and this is the next night he has this dream. Like, do we have a bell all of a sudden? But that this is overnight because it does indicate he had shut up the women's wombs where they weren't bearing children. So it would seem that there has to be some time frame that's passing there. Um, but that's the limit of what it tells us. So I can't say completely how much time is passing between between with all of this. I do know in studying uh, this for this lesson, I do know that it indicates in talking about Abimelech because there's more than one Abimelech. There's Abimelech here with Abraham, and then there's Abimelech with Isaac, and apparently this is a at least one commentary was pointing out that this was around 100 years later that Isaac is back there, so it's not the same guy. That's why it might have been a title, and so how much time is transpiring in this chapter? I'm not sure. I would say that possibly it would have to be longer than overnight because, I mean, if it's just overnight, how do I know all the women are
Well,
no longer having children?
how old was Abraham when he came? 75?
Not when he comes to, here appears to
No, but when he
Abimelech.
first came
He's
down.
75 there in Genesis 12.
So now in the next chapter, you'll see where Sarah, or
About 90.
Isaac's promise, the birth of Isaac,
Yeah,
is
this,
100 years old.
he is.
Yeah, so
And she's-
25 years at least
Yes.
passed between when he left. and
Left
this point.
there. But I don't think that's what John's getting at. John's getting at just how long is taking place here in Acts 20 with Sarah is there with Abimelech. You know, how much time is transpiring. And I wouldn't say it was years, but I would say there's a little bit of time passing there. Um, you know, and
When studying this, I was curious.
but it's interesting though, and I'm about to get myself in trouble, ladies. But it's interesting. You see there when you first are introduced there in Genesis 12 to all this starts to happen. Abraham is 75. Sarah is what 66 or so.
Yeah, she's about 10 years young.
Well, 9, 10 years, yeah. And yet, what does the Bible describe Sarah as?
Beautiful woman.
A beautiful woman, you know.
Enough that
And in fact, you know, here she is,
at 90.
you know, up pushing 90, and I want to be very not get myself into a big hole, but you know,
Oh, we make leeways for preachers.
you don't normally think of somebody chasing after a 90-year-old,
Especially a king or.
you know. Now again, ladies, I know we have no ladies here that are 90, but you know, I'm 80. That's okay. We're not talking about 80s. We're talking about 90. So, but it's just it's interesting. But did anybody else have any questions, Bill?
I think this is what you referred to a little while ago in Acts. In Acts 17:30. During these times of ignorance, God overlooked, but now commands only and everywhere to me.
Yeah, and the King James says winked at. He winked at these things. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Preguntas, hermanos? Well, we're going to stop here. We'll be in chapter 21 next week, so if you want to be looking at that, continuing along, we're moving along fairly well right now with doing about a chapter a week and all. And I do encourage everyone to continue to study this stuff. There's a lot more there than what we cover in the class. So appreciate everybody's attention.